Hi, and welcome back to this installment of Frank and Mary here in Westboro. If you haven't seen the show before, my name is Art Bergeron. My day job is I do nothing but elder law. I work at Myrick O'Connell right here in beautiful Westboro. But this is not about my day job. It's about my friends Frank and Mary and their goal, which is to live in their house until they die and be buried in the backyard. And if that means Westboro, that means they never want to leave. They don't even want to go to Southboro. God forbid. They don't want to go to Texas with their kids. So the goal of life then, if you're like them, is to make sure you know the people you need to know and the programs you need to know about in order to stay here in Westboro. So my co-host is Shelby Marshall, whom we've been doing this show now for like a long time, like several years.
Yeah.
Several years through COVID. We even had more shows, right? We were like inundating you with shows through COVID to once again to try to keep people aware of what was going on. That's really one of the purposes of this show, especially for seniors, especially for you who are not crazy about a lot of the internet-based information that you might be getting about town, is to help you kind of understand what's going on in town. And so Shelby, our wonderful second-term selectman, right, tries to bring you information that she really feels is relevant for this. So Shelby, I know we have a return guest we brought her back because our ratings went up so high the last time she was. Whom do we have and what are we talking about?
Yeah, great. Great to see you, Arthur, and friends of Frank and Mary out there who continue to watch us. I do want to put a plug in for folks who have reached out to me and have submitted ideas for content, because we want to bring information to you that you find valuable, not just things that I might find of interest or I think you need to know. So do keep that input coming, and we'll make sure that our contact information is up at the end of this presentation, thanks to our editor, Aiden Horgan, who's awesome and behind the scenes.
We'll call him our producer.
Our producer,
our executive producer.
Right.
Aiden Horgan. Right.
Excuse me. So anyway, without further ado, we do have a return guest. I'm very excited that our town manager, Kristi Williams, has agreed to be our guest today. Totally appropriate timing. Call it luck, call it great planning, whatever it is. Kristi's going to give us an update on the FY21 budget closeout, current year estimates, and just kind of things going on. Obviously, some federal funding coming into the town. As well as looking ahead now, we're already planning for the next fiscal year. And so lots to talk about in the next 20 or so minutes here. So without further ado, Kristi, welcome.
Thank you so much. We had recently held a budget summit, which was for the select board and the advisory finance committee and department heads. And so I've shrank my presentation a little bit to make it a little bit easier. And so I'm just going to share that on my screen. So as Shelby said, we're just going to talk about where we closed out at the end of fiscal 21, which would have happened on June 30th, 2021. And you can see here, when we compare to fiscal 22, that we had about a 2.3% increase in the average single family tax bill. So we're just up over 10,000 to the average single family tax bill. We've also increased our free cash, that's on that first line, by about $3 million. And that's the money that we use for one-time costs, a lot of our capital equipment and capital budget needs. And so our overall budget increase from 20 to 21 was about 2.5%. This is just an increase, or this is a graph that shows how we compare to what we call our data dashboard or our benchmark communities. So communities that are around us and also communities throughout the state that we think we compare to. So you'll see us on the green line right in the middle there. As we look at FY22, that's the year that we're currently in. So that started July 1st of 2021. We had that budget approved at the May town meeting. And so there's some, numbers are constantly changing. We always try to give that message out there because we don't know what our revenues are going to be, and we don't know, how things are going to come in. And so our numbers are always changing. And so this just shows that from our annual town meeting in May of 21, we had estimated an average single family tax bill increase of $332. And so at this point, this is late breaking news. We didn't even have this at the budget summit, but at this point, because numbers are always changing, we're estimating the increase to be about $359.89, so about $360 to the average single family. And that's if the all the warrant articles at the October town meeting pass. So if you go and you vote yes on all of the things that would impact taxes, it would be that $360 number is what we're estimating right now. And then this just shows the average single family tax bill as it happened since 2010. And so this is the increase. This is the chart we show often. And so we're at the end, that estimated 360. This just shows where we're at with our reserves. So our free cash and stabilization. Our goal is to be between 10 and 15% of our general fund budget. You can see at the bottom there that at this point, we're actually above that. So we're at the 16.25%. And that's because a lot of our free cash we spend at the annual town meeting that will happen in March. And so that number will go down when we have articles at the annual town meeting in March where we're asking that people purchase those capital budget items. And this just shows our OPEB trust. So OPEB is other post-employment benefits. Those are health insurance and life insurance that the town pays for retirees. And so we put money into a trust to fund those in the future. Right now, our unfunded OPEB liability is about 113 million. And so we've put money away. We're obviously not at our unfunded liability, but we continue to put money away, which is something that we're proud of because some towns aren't even doing that yet. And then this shows our excess levy capacity has grown. So that means we're not taxing to the full amount that under the law that we could. And so you can see that it's grown, it's estimated to grow in this fiscal year 2022. As we're looking ahead at FY23, we're looking at different pressures and priorities. And one of the biggest things that's happening for us is we're really updating our capital plan. We think it's really important to put all of the town's long-term capital needs into one document so that everyone can have a full picture by going to one source to really understand what we need. So that's from fire trucks like you see on the screen to the library project that we've heard about to maybe a new school or another building that might come up in the future. And so that's something that we haven't done in the past that we're really working towards at this point. And this is just shows
Kristi,
yep.
Can we just go back to that other slide and just for clarification, and again, folks that may have not heard your presentations before or aren't familiar with the capital plan. So we've always had a capital planning process.
Yes. What
is different about what we're undertaking now?
Sure. So previously we have a 5-year capital plan. We still have a 5-year capital plan. We have a capital expenditure planning committee. So departments and committees will come and request capital projects, and the committee will rate them and put them sort of in order for that 5-year capital plan. And that's always happened. But those items have really fallen maybe under $1 million. So some of those building projects that I mentioned weren't really included in that document. Now we're asking that all of those capital projects, all capital items be in the capital plan, and that we really include an outlook maybe 20 years past that 5-year mark, just for things that we know are coming. So we might not have as much detail about them, but things that we know, that we've talked about. For example, we know that we have a need for a substation at some point. We don't know when that's coming, but that's something that we would want people to keep in mind when they're looking at the long-term capital plan.
And I think another great example of this, as I've had the privilege to sit in some of these meetings, is our DPW director, Chris Pan, really giving us that long-term look of the fleet inventory that he has and equipment, and really kind of projecting out when those items are going to be sort of at, and very end of life or near end of life, and what those investments might look like for us long-term.
Yeah, and even more so, Chris has done a great job of looking at all the infrastructure in town. And so that'll be another piece of the capital plan. So, right. All maintenance of our roads and sidewalks and, all the items that we have in town.
Right.
So, yeah. This slide just shows our 5-year capital plan. This was the FY22 proposed capital budget and the funding sources. So this just sort of gives a snapshot of what that looks like and how it's starting to come together as we're working on that document. And then, so FY23 budget pressures, we have 6 unions on the town side. 5 of them have contracts that will expire on June 30th. And so we're working to negotiate with them new contracts. On the school side, they actually have settled contracts with all of their unions. But one thing that the superintendent pointed out to us at the budget summit was that year 2 of one of their union contracts was this 3.5% increase, which included and also the 5% COLA at the end of fiscal 22.
Oh, sorry, Kristi, and correct me if I'm wrong, the school union contract that year 2, this particular contract is their largest. Is that right?
That's my understanding.
In terms of number of employees within that union. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then the transportation contract, so the buses, that was something that we heard about in previous years because they had to negotiate a new contract. But with, the increased industry pressures and unanticipated costs, they may have to add routes and so they're just being mindful of that being a pressure going into this year. I won't get too far into the police department staffing because I understand you had Chief Laurie and Deputy Chief Minardi on your show, but that's something that we're looking at as we go into FY23. We have a couple different options for possible funding of that. One of them, as you can see here, is called ARPA. ARPA is American Rescue Plan Act money. So that's money that's coming from the federal government to the cities and towns to deal with COVID. And so Westboro is slated to get $5.6 million. And so we're working through a whole process that I'm sure I'll come back at some point and talk about on your show. But the point is that the police department in 2019 had a staffing study that recommended additional patrol officers. And so they're working through that. It's something that we kind of deferred during COVID. And it's something that's going to definitely come back in fiscal 23. And then the fire department staffing, similarly, they had a staffing study in 2018. We had a special town meeting also in 2018 where the town approved Chief Purcell to apply for the SAFER grant and receive the money. And that SAFER grant paid for the chief to bring on 8 additional firefighters. And so at the time, and as it's played out, the SAFER grant incrementally provides less funding. And so that means that the cost of those 8 firefighters incrementally comes back on the budget. And so in FY23, that's really the first year that we will fully absorb the cost of the 8 additional firefighters. But as you can see, our biggest impact year was really this current fiscal year, where there was sort of the steepest drop off of grant funding. We have a couple new positions that we will have to fund in 23. So one is a grants administrator, chief procurement officer. We actually have already hired that person because we were able to use CARES Act, which is another grant that we received due to COVID. CARES Act money, there's an article on the fall town meeting warrant to fund the second half of that position for this fiscal year. And then, of course, it'll continue in the FY23 budget. And this is really a position that we've needed for a long time. We've identified this as something that's, we identified it in the non-union staffing study as a need. It really creates a support for all of our departments. And it's something that we're excited about. And it's particularly important as we're looking at all the reporting requirements related to those grants I mentioned that we got from COVID, the CARES Act and the ARPA. And then also we'll introduce the community development assistant. So that is intended to report to the community development director. And this position would have some responsibilities related to community development, as was pointed out in that non-public safety staffing study, but also would have a focus on sustainability and the climate action plan implementation. And this is something, even though it's a different title, it's something that we've been talking about for a long time. So the Climate Action Plan calls for a sustainability coordinator. This would have a different title, but would have those responsibilities.
Yeah, and I think just a point on the grants administrator and procurement officer. This is something that has been a top priority identified in our strategic plan, the staffing study that Kristi mentioned, and certainly of the board as well. I can't think of one visit by any department head or almost any conversation where we as a board have not asked for, what are we doing about grants, right? And we've applied to, I mean, Kristi, that might be an interesting separate exercise of how many grants, what's that bar chart? What does that pie chart look like of how many grants have we applied to, even just in the past 5 years, and how much money have we been awarded? Because it certainly has increased significantly. But with each grant comes reporting and requirements, and so there's there's certainly a huge upside, but there is an administrative burden that we have to appreciate. So this department is this position is key, I think, to Westboro's long-term kind of growth and vision.
Shelby, you mentioned that that would be a really interesting bar chart. Also, as you mentioned, not only pointing out the grants that you've received, but the grants that were applied for. Because I think, for a lot of folks, you don't realize you don't win them all, so the goal of this is to be taking some chances, and to be applying for stuff that you might or may not hit on. And then some of them you do. And that's, but in the nature of things, if you don't have somebody who is just doing that, and you're only applying for the sure things, well, then that's all you're going to get is the sure thing. So that's really interesting in terms of community investment of money, right?
Yep. Well, I'm just one member of the board. Kristi can take it under advisement as a 1/5 recommendation.
Moving on to some other budget pressures. When I've came on your show a few times during sort of the height of COVID, and we talked about what we were doing with the budget. Specifically because a lot of the areas that we get revenue, so hotel motel taxes, meals tax, those are things that obviously went down during COVID, and we had to respond to that. And so, the school and town departments alone reduced our budgets by about $2.5 million to respond to COVID, which now we're sort of working to bring those levels back. And those are things that that we removed, that we were able to remove during COVID, but certainly are hearing and feeling the impacts of that. And so here's something, we started to bring stuff back in 22, but these are things that will show up in 23. Probably the most important to many folks is that hazardous waste day. That's something that we did remove. We haven't had for a couple of years now, and we're certainly hearing that people are missing it. So we intend to bring that back in FY23. We took away a lot of professional development from our department. So that's a lot of training, professional resources for departments. And even though that's not as public facing, it's really important. Those professional organizations really help us in doing our jobs every day. And it was an initiative of the strategic plan to make sure that we're providing the right level of professional development. OPEB funding was something that we cut, but as you see, we're continuing to add a little. We think it's really important to bring that back, and so you'll definitely see that in 23. We cut overtime for our IT department. That's something that we want to bring back. Also, some other positions, our DPW seasonal staff, and like I said, the deferred police department staffing implementation, some professional services, and then miscellaneous expenses. So those will start to come back. We're trying to do it over multiple years, in a responsible way. And then here's just a list of some other priorities that you've probably been hearing about, and you might see in the upcoming town meeting. Some of these are listed, the first 4 are listed in the way that they show up on the strategic plan, but I'll just go through them quickly. The strategic plan calls for that multi-use trail system. Sometimes we call it BWALTS, sometimes we call it, the multi-use trail. Either way, the community is interested in having this trail system, and we have a committee that's been working really hard on the feasibility study, which should be complete soon, and then there'll be a request for starting to fund that project. The second one is conducting a needs assessment for Westboro senior population to identify opportunities to support our seniors. So this is something that we've been talking about for a couple years. We really had intended to bring it forward before now, but with COVID, that really isn't conducive to the process. So this process we see as being very engaging, requiring a lot of community meetings and outreach. And so we want to make sure that everyone that we need to hear from is comfortable participating in that process. And so that's something that we'll seek funding for at the Springtown meeting. Designing and building an intergenerational community center. That we've talked about community center for a long time. That's something that is specifically in the strategic plan is intergenerational. And so that's recreation, but it's also the senior center. And so, we don't know what exactly that will look like, but that's all part of that conversation. Strategically acquiring open space. So, that we purchased 2 very large parcels last year. And so we've really depleted our open space fund. So that's something that we'll be asking for in the upcoming town meeting. And then of course, the Community Preservation Act, which I'm sure Shelby has brought to you in a different episode. We're going to update our strategic plan. We're doing a full technology assessment. And then, other things that you've heard about is the master plan and climate action plan, which as those things start to get implemented, we'll have some costs associated. And that is the end of my presentation.
We have nothing going on in Westboro. Wow.
Just unbelievable. That's just unbelievable. So, and it's just staggering, the amount of stuff that you, and the fact that you're just really trying to be, you're really looking ahead. You're constantly looking ahead. Now, I was just curious. Once again, I'm not a Westboro person. When I was looking at the amount of your capital that you're actually funding out of like free cash every year, right?
Yeah.
So what kind of, how much do you have in outstanding bonds at this point? And is that shrinking or growing, or, I just, if you knew off the top of your head, I had no concept, because I know in other communities and in mine, a lot of the items that you were talking about would be the subject of kind of ongoing bond authorizations, right?
Right. Yeah. So we have about 62 million in short-term borrow, a little over 11 million that has been authorized and unissued, and then our long-term, I want to say it's like 100 million. We implemented a couple of years ago this debt strategy where we're really working with this capital improvement fund that we have to try to pay off debt a little more quickly than the typical 20 or 30 year borrow. And that's really to set us up for some of these projects that we see coming down the pike. But we're really proud of, the amount of free cash that we're able to use for all of these projects. Because as you said, we don't need to go out to bond for an ambulance. We have that reserve, and that served us very well during COVID also. So things that are completely unexpected, we're able to respond to with the level of reserves that we have.
Right.
And Kristi, I'm sorry, Arthur, I just want to make a point that information on our long-term debt is available through the town manager's link on the town's website. Kristi has been great about posting all of these presentations that have taken place over the course of the year. And our budget book is an award-winning, literally, production. Kristi is understandably very proud of that award. Hopefully we'll secure it again. But the point is to be transparent and informative in a way that people actually understand what we're talking about. And Kristi and her team have done an exceptional job with that.
An exception, because it's one thing to be transparent, but another thing to be understandable. You can put all the information out there, but if everybody's just scratching their head at the end of the day, what was the point of that? So right. This was really wonderful. This was really wonderful. And once again, I find myself listening to these presentations and kind of enviously in some ways. It's really quite something. So Kristi, this was terrific. Once again, we always, our ratings always go up when you go on, because it's so interesting. And so thank you to Shelby for inviting you on again. Folks, I hope that you've enjoyed the presentation. I just want to ask at the end, if people do have questions, and want to actually have a conversation with somebody about it, as opposed to trying to figure it out online, just like to get a number, right? What's the best number?
So 508-366-3030 will go to our office, and happy to answer your question or direct you to someone who might be a better resource.
Right. But as you can tell, Kristi really can answer your questions. She knows this stuff. So Kristi, thank you so much. Shelby, so much for having Kristi come back on. Folks, I hope you find these shows interesting and informative. As Shelby has said, we'd like to know if you've got other shows that you think would be useful. But one of the interesting things about listening to Kristi was she really referred to many of the people we've had on this show, talking to you about many of these things, you know, from the golf course to the police and the fire and the wonderful public works guys. So if you've got other people, that's the point of the show. So please let us know. Please let us know. And thank you for watching, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next installment of Frank and Mary here in Westboro. Thank you very much.